Thanks for tuning in to the Medevac podcast, powered by the Robert Irvine Foundation, whose mission is to support and strengthen the physical and mental well-being of our nation's heroes and their families. I'm one of your hosts, David Reid.
And I'm your other host, Christian Meyers. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Medevac podcast. If you're new here, keep in mind there's a price for the show. You have to share it with a friend or family member when you get something out of today's episode, because you are. I already said it. You're getting it.
This is a good one.
Yeah. Our guest today, this
Part
is
two.
Part two with Chelsea Tersavich.
Hello again. Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
We're going to be diving into, if you missed part one, go back and listen to it. Right meow. Go back. You're going to hear about Chelsea's background, her time in the military, becoming a PA, up to working for Mindbloom. And now we're going to talk a little bit about who Mindbloom is, what you guys do there, and how you've been helping people all across the U.S.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. You guys are about to talk about one of my favorite topics. If you ask my husband, I talk about this all of the time to the point that he knows it.
Drugs?
Yes. Legal drugs.
I believe it's medicine.
Legal.
Yes.
Has people corrected you in that path before? I've had people say that, just like drugs. And they're like, no, it's plant-based medicines.
You know, sometimes I think it's maybe a little different, the space that I'm working in versus like some of the other spaces like vets and stuff, because those are plant medicines typically, not always. I mean, we are able to synthesize some of them now, but like ketamine is synthesized, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's not
Not naturally produced.
Which is actually one of the complaints I get from people sometimes. Funny enough, they're like, I really only want to do plant medicines, but I guess I'll do this because it's more readily available.
And is this as they're taking a copious amounts of prescriptions already on the sides?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Which is funny
it
to me.
varies. That part varies, honestly.
I kind of understand the argument, but at the same time, unless you've tried it, then you really don't know what you prefer.
Yeah. And so nerd part one, right, of ketamine, one of the things people think about is like, well, this is a new substance, or it's an animal tranquilizer, right? Like horse tranquilizer is one of those myths. It is used in animal medicine, yes, but we've been using it in humans as an FDA-approved medicine since 1970 as an anesthetic.
Been around for
it
50 years.
So well studied and so safe that it's part of the WHO's list of important medicines. It's super cheap. We give it to kids, like young kids in the ER. We give it to people that are older, like geriatric population, because of how safe it generally is. And that's why the military transitioned to using it more in deployed medicine, because of how much safer it is than the opioids we were using.
That's what I was given when I was injured in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
They gave me ketamine.
Yeah. Do you remember any of it?
No, they said, I was like, knock me out. I can't deal with this anymore. And they're like, well, we can't knock you out, but we'll keep you awake.
But we'll give you ketamine.
And apparently I was just cracking the funniest jokes known to man.
I'm not surprised. I mean,
typical,
if you ever watch, I sometimes go down the rabbit hole of people coming out of anesthesia.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We just saw one the other day. That was pretty funny.
Which one was that?
We don't have to go down that rabbit hole.
It's an easy rabbit hole to go down.
Never mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, most people feel really good on it, right? And so it brings out jokes, it brings out happiness for a lot of people.
We have a past guest who talked about his experience with ketamine, and he was the only person that I've ever heard said that he had a hell-like journey.
It does happen.
He explained it in detail. It is terrifying.
It does happen. And I do warn people, particularly if there's trauma in backgrounds, like I'm like, hey, this could come up.
Yeah.
But for most people, we get a new space to those traumas that we haven't gotten before. And most people are like, wow, like I could actually like be in the trauma and not respond the way that I normally do. And a bunch of my clients, my patients actually have used it to retell their trauma stories as well, which is helping them kind of heal from the trauma. Sure. So yes, I mean, any psychedelic can have scary, not fun experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
It goes to a whole bunch of things though, right? It goes to your past, one, right? But it goes to the mindset going into it, the physical setting you have around you, the intentions you're setting. If you're saying, show me my fears, your fears are going to come, right? And I've had to have that conversation with people. Like the wording we put in our brain as we go into these experiences is really important because your brain's going to show you if you want it to.
It's very important. When I did the Ibogaine, my intention was to kill the bad part of myself.
Oh, that was interesting.
It was.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was an interesting experience. Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes it's just based on the psychedelic compound that you're using too, right? Like DMT for a lot of people is a death rebirth experience, right? And it's just kind of that's why it's the God molecule. So I think there is some aspect of that and where it's working in the brain and how it's working in the brain. But with ketamine, I would say, generally speaking, most people are having really positive, really enjoyable experiences, maybe space from the anxiety they've had for a long time or the trauma response or feeling happy, right? A lot of people come to ketamine for depression and they're just like, I don't know what happiness and joy feels like.
Yeah.
And they're like, holy cow, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can see what joy and happiness is like again, or for the first time for some people. So it's definitely different in that respect, I think, from some of the other psychedelics. And it goes back to how it's working, right? When we think of like psilocybin, MDMA, which kind of an atypical psychedelic, DMT, ayahuasca, all like LSD, they're all serotonin based,
Sure.
right? So they work on that pathway, which is also why you can't be on serotonin based medications when you go do those kind of retreats or when you want to take it. I've had so many people like, I've tried psilocybin and nothing happens. And I was like, were you on the same SSRI at that point?
Yeah, you're on an SSRI. It's not going to work at all.
Yeah, that's why. And they're like, no way. And I was like, yep.
Not only that, but it can be more dangerous.
It can be.
You can get
serotonin syndrome.
Yeah, fatal serotonin syndrome, which
not
sounds terrible. Way to die.
Yeah, it's not good. I've actually seen it in person, like serotonin syndrome before. Yeah.
And what does that look like?
Convulsions, red skin, high temperature, hallucinations. That's like the far end of the spectrum. And you can actually die from it. I've seen more mild versions of it too, where it's just more agitation and like temperature is a big part of it because that's like our temperature regulation is messed up for a lot of people with serotonin syndrome. It's not super common, but can be if you're being prescribed a lot of not just psychiatric medicines, but a lot of just regular medications can work on serotonin. So yeah, it definitely can predispose you. Ketamine, it does not work directly on serotonin. It works on a neurotransmitter in our brain called glutamate. Glutamate's actually the most prevalent neurotransmitter. Most people don't even realize it. Most people don't even know what glutamate is, honestly. It's involved in a lot of really important things like memory formation, cognition, emotional regulation, right? So the things that we need, right? Surprise.
To feed our brains,
It's also really key in neuroplasticity, right? And so all of these psychedelics have a role in neuroplasticity. Glutamate plays a key role in that, right? It's our brain's ability to create new synaptic connections, to create new neural pathways and rewire itself basically, right? And we're able to do that at all stages of our lives. That's why as adults, we can learn new tasks, right? That's why even though I was 30 when I went to PA school, way after my brain development ended, I was able to learn this whole new skill and continue to learn, right? When we're depressed, when we're anxious, when we're in a heightened stress response, we're dumping all these stress hormones, which in a short-term fight or flight, when we're deployed, we need that, right? We need that stress response to get us out of these situations. But sometimes it doesn't turn off, or it doesn't turn off all the way, right? You guys probably know that very well.
Yeah, it's like a leaking faucet.
It is. Once you turn it on full blast for a year, for 9 months, whatever it is, over and over and over, because even when you're back in the States, you're still training, you're still getting ready for that next deployment.
Still in that environment.
Exactly. You can't totally turn it off. So it makes sense that we are in these heightened states for as long as we are. And then when we get out of the military, we're like, what the fuck now?
And that's something we talk about a lot too, is the military's need for the proper transitioning services.
I agree.
Out there.
Yeah.
Because you train, you said, for a year in TRADOC. And then when you get out, it's like, hey, your orders are coming in a week or two.
And if you're going through a MEB, like the transition was for the Army SFL TAP. I went to a class for a week. And as a PA, they were like, we can't help you.
Like,
we're not
don't worry, you'll find a job.
We're not designed for you.
So you're
which is crazy.
You're put into this mentality where you're on 100%. That faucet is turned up to 100%, right? And all of a sudden you're out and you're expected to just plug right back into society, which they've stripped from you in the beginning. They're like, these rules don't apply to you. But now they do.
But now you got to go back. Sorry, bye.
We're not going to teach you how to figure that out.
And no wonder why you have such high veteran suicides.
Yep. You lose the camaraderie, the community, right? Even if you don't, you do, right? Because you're not in that. That was the thing that I still miss the most.
The tribe.
Yeah.
Right? It's so true. I thankfully had other friends who had already gone through the transition that helped me through the transition. And then we went into a global pandemic. So everyone was isolated.
Yeah.
So that kind of helped honestly make my transition easier.
Everyone's
Well, good that there was some good to come out of it.
Yeah.
That and remote medicine. Those were the two silver linings.
Yeah, true.
But like I see friends of mine getting out now, or friends that have been out for a while, really struggling with that connection piece. It's one of the reasons why I really wanted to come here and do this. Like Mindbloom was like, would you want to do it remotely? And I was like, no.
Yeah, it's much better in person.
It is. And like this, I think as a veteran community, connection is key. Right. And we lost a lot of connection when we got out, but we lost even more during the pandemic.
Yeah. It lost the ability to.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, meeting some people on camera to do some yoga, not the same.
It is not the same.
It's a nice option.
But it's not the same.
It's not. Yeah.
So, ketamine, going back to that, like I mentioned, it helped me with my trauma and the anxiety that was coming around the trauma, right? And I've watched it over the last 3 years. So I've been doing this for 3 years now, like legitimately change people's lives. I've had people who weren't able to leave their homes get jobs, drive for the first time ever sometimes.
Wow.
People who realized that their job was creating a lot of their stress and totally changed their life paths. And some of them actually coming into this space, going back to school to be a therapist or psychologist or go back to be a clinician even.
Yeah.
We've had clinicians who've tried our program come start working for us because it's changed their lives
Because they
so
believe in it
much.
so much.
And just one treatment.
Sometimes one set potentially. So ketamine, we work in sets of treatment. It does have a cumulative benefit.
Okay.
There are people with the very first time, they're like, my life has changed. Hallelujah. Right? Like that does happen. But I would say for most people, it's the accumulation. And for me, it was the accumulation for sure.
And how many on average are you seeing
treatments?
of these treatments that really start to settle in for
It's
these?
usually like 3 or 4 treatments.
Okay. And you guys do a typical protocol of like 3 and 6, right? 6.
Yeah, we do 6. So for most people, by the midway point of their first set, they're starting to see improvements. And we published a study in, has it been a year? 2 years? Year? I want to say it was a year ago now. Wow, time's flying. In the Journal of Affective Disorders that showed that we did 4 treatments when I first started with Mindbloom. So I've watched this evolution. 4 treatments had tremendous success rates. Like we were seeing comparable to IM ketamine, like upwards of 70% improvement in symptomology. Wow. And people who said that they were suicidal at the start of treatments, 63% saw complete removal or reduction in those passive suicidal thoughts.
That's massive.
It is huge. And that was with 4. We do 6 now.
Yeah.
So it's a huge, like, when you think about traditional mental health treatments, SSRIs, SNRIs, they don't work for everyone.
Yeah.
It's if we're lucky, about 50% of the population will respond.
And too, the negative connotations behind all of them just devastate your body in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the improper usage, the improper long-term usage.
Once you're on them, actually, they're finding that once you're on these things, it's virtually impossible to get off.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people with ketamine taper off.
Yeah. Well,
It's true though.
Having interventions like that.
It's true though. How much is it really working, right? So some people build tolerance, so then we need to adjust the dose again. We need to switch meds entirely. We need to add in another medication, or there's side effects. So we have to add in a medication to combat the side effects, right?
Yeah.
So
or even a lot of people don't even make it past that first step. They get prescribed.
Yep.
They say, thanks, I'm better now.
I don't want this.
They're not.
Yeah.
They never do the work to actually make it through that.
And
it's called masking symptoms.
Yeah, you're masking. Yeah.
And not only that, like that's just the people that come to the clinicians, right? There's still like probably half of the population that's not.
Yeah.
And probably even higher in the veteran population. Like the stigma around mental health, understandably, I almost didn't become a PA because I sought help for my mental health.
Yeah.
Is huge.
It's massive.
Right? And so we say maybe 50% of the population as a whole isn't talking about their symptoms, isn't getting help support for that. I'd say it's probably higher in the veteran community.
Sure.
And then with the negative experiences people have with the healthcare system at the VA, depending on your VA, that stigmatizes it even more.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful VA that I work with. They're actually out of Charleston, but they have a location in Savannah. But I know some of the other VAs around my area, for people that I see for their compensation, pension evaluations, tell me horror stories, just horror stories. And that's 2 hours away from my VA.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't even make sense.
It is so true.
Yeah. So I am excited. The VA has been starting to actually, not everywhere. Georgia does not do it. I asked. But there are locations that are starting to do IV, IM, ketamine treatments. The problem, though, is they're kind of strict still, right? They're wanting, like, veterans to have treatment resistant mental health conditions. Why do we have to wait until someone's gone through trials and trials and trials to get to this point where now they're even more downtrodden? They might be more depressed, more stressed, more like trauma symptoms to try this out. Like, why do we have to do that?
What do you think that is? I mean, there is a copious amount of red tape, but this
is my personal opinion, not Mindbloom's. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, well, personal opinion from a PA, it's that's involved in the medical community, I think holds some weight.
I think there is a lot of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And I think we have turned medicine into an industry, right? Insurance.
Absolutely.
There's no question about it.
It's why so they didn't want to give me, if you listen to the last one, Otezla for my skin condition, because it's expensive. It's a name brand medication. I had to jump through so many hoops and have several other trials, and the Famvir, the antiviral that I'm currently on, until I failed many other medications. And we had to still put in a special request for the VA pharmacy to fill those.
And see, if you stop and you look at this from just a 10,000 foot view, let's give them SSRIs, which take 2 to 3 months to start
if
working.
we're lucky.
And then you have to do 6 months of testing once you're at that point. Or we could just do 6 weeks of once a week ketamine.
Yep.
Yeah, and they want you to try multiple programs of therapies and group therapies. And
you have to do, if you want the medication, you have to, like,
I do think you should, like, if you're seeking ketamine therapy or any sort of psychedelic intervention, you should be seeking talk therapy at the same time.
I agree.
Because it's a waste. It's not a benefit to yourself.
Or at least some way to integrate the experiences.
Yeah, you're not arming yourself properly.
No. And so I will say, Mindbloom, we don't require therapy for everyone. I do have people I do require therapy to be on board with.
Yeah.
Depends on the severity of symptoms, trauma in their background, a variety of factors. We work with coaches. So we have our guides that work with the individuals to integrate their experiences and come up with tools that'll help build the resiliency, help rewire the brain. That could be something simple. Well, I say simple, but it could be something straightforward like meditation, right? Starting an exercise routine, some physical integrative things. It could be more like cognitive reframing of our experiences, pausing before we respond to something and being like, hold on, is this really how I want to respond? Which with the ketamine, getting that little bit of space already there kind of allows for those things to set in. And we're also working with our neuroplasticity, so we're able to rewire stuff.
Able to learn it and apply those things.
Exactly. I met with someone yesterday for check-in, a new person to me, who we were just trying to figure out their dosing a little bit more, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I was like, so how are you feeling? Right? I read through where you were starting. You've done 2 sessions now. Do you feel like you're seeing a shift? And she's like, yeah, actually. Like, I'm exercising every day. I've never been able to get exercise to stick, but it's just happening.
Yeah.
Is that the ketamine? I'm like, yes.
That's neuroplasticity.
That is anything you don't want in your life, get rid of it now. And something you want to put in your life that's going to support you, this is the time to do it.
Put it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing, honestly.
So you've probably heard multiple experiences from Ibogaine and 5-MeO and all of this. What do you see the biggest difference between ketamine and these other plant-based medicines?
Outside of the glutamate?
Yeah.
Let's see. Biggest difference. I would say the experience, at least with tablets, which Mindbloom is working with, probably is a more, I don't want to say gentle. Gentle's not the right word for it, but
well, because ibogaine is a slap in the face. Like,
I have
yeah, you're right.
I have not. I have not done it, but I have heard that. Same thing with like ayahuasca. Some of the experiences with Aya that I've heard about. The space we aim for with Mindbloom's protocol is what we call it's a mild to moderately dissociative state. So not the state you were in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was a deeper dissociative state. We want you to remember the experience though, so that you can integrate it. And I would describe it like a really deep, wonderful meditation, a trance. If you've ever done a float tank, I've had some people describe it as like one of their best float tank experiences, similar to that. So that's the space we're aiming for. It's different than IV and IM for a lot of people. The more sudden onset of IV and IM, because it's like almost straight to the brain, right?
Push right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those.
Yeah, there was no remembering for me at all. Like I was just gone.
Yeah.
Because the IV goes in and
You're
I
like,
was like,
"Woo!"
that's it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I'm talking to people about dissociation on a spectrum, I'm like, we're not aiming for that level. That's not where we're going. But the suddenness of it going directly to your brain rather than this kind of gradual incline and then gradual decline can feel a lot more intense, even though it might not be.
Okay.
And that's just because of the sudden onset of it. And there's also an inhaled version of ketamine. There's actually an FDA approved version called Spravato, where it's not actual racemic ketamine like you got and like what we prescribe. It's S-ketamine.
The S-isomer?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So if for those of you who don't know, ketamine is actually made up of two different ketamine compounds, R and S. S-ketamine is the S compound. Spravato is the brand name. It's expensive. Insurance doesn't always cover it. You have to be treatment-resistant depression. That's the only FDA indication. I think with suicidality is another indication for it at this point too. But there's not really off-label use of Spravato at this point. Versus that's what we're doing with racemic ketamine. We're using it off-label. So do either of you guys know what off-label means?
No.
Not
No.
for the intended use, but
Basically, yeah, that's actually it. So it's not the FDA's intended use. It's a legal substance, but we are not using it in an FDA approved way.
Sure.
We do this because it's really expensive to get things FDA approved once it's already gone through the process. So rather than putting all that money into the research, into the approval process, we're allowed as clinicians to use it off label, especially when there's data like we have with ketamine to support its use.
promising data for the future. That makes sense.
So, and I mean, we started ketamine off label in the sedation pain management realm, like you had. And then about 20 years, we've been using it in the mental health field because we started seeing people that we were giving to anesthesia for sedation, for pain management, were kind of coming to and not being suicidal or not being depressed, right?
Yeah.
And so that started us into this field that we're in now of ketamine for mental health, for depression. That was really kind of one of the earlier indicators for it. Anxiety, which is what Mindbloom does, is depression, anxiety. But there's also studies around OCD, substance use disorders, trauma, although distinction, not acute stress, not acute trauma. So not someone who just had an accident and we give them ketamine in an ER, or actually we're finding maybe not the best thing to give on the battlefield because it does at least short term, intensify some of that stress response. We're not really 100% sure if it correlates to higher levels of PTSD down the road, but we know that soon after acute stress phase is heightened in people that we give ketamine to versus a non-ketamine sedation. So
Interesting.
yeah, that's one of the kind of niche things about it.
Yeah.
But
Do you know if there's studies that showcase if it's single use or like if you guys did a protocol after an acute trauma? So say you get in a car accident and then when you're in the hospital recovering, they plan for you to do 3 treatments over the course of 2 weeks or something.
that's a great question.
Curious.
Only ones I've seen have been like single use ER.
Okay.
So there's hundreds of studies, so it's possible that's been done, but I haven't seen them yet.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah,
if you knew
no,
that.
that would actually be a really good.
I mean, it could
area.
make sense that, you take the ketamine right after that trauma, so you have that initial drop off to only be met by an equal rise on the
On the
back
other
end.
side, as you're still processing it,
Yeah,
right?
of
Because you're
course,
still
yeah.
dealing with the physical
You just had
repercussions.
a car accident
Yeah.
yesterday. Like it's
You just
still fresh.
Got blown up, right?
Yeah.
It's a recovery road. It's not just like I'm better, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's definitely
I
possible.
grew my leg back right away. Just kidding.
Regeneration.
Yeah. We're waiting for that day.
Yeah, I know. There's
Waiting for
when's
that
the pill for that going to
Yeah,
come
right?
out? But I digress.
One day, maybe. One day.
It's possible.
It's already out there.
Like a little lizard, you grow the baby leg back first. Yeah. Little baby tail.
They actually just did and we're going off on a tangent on here. They just discovered through that kind of gene manipulation, regrowing cartilage.
Oh, yeah, I did see that.
So yeah, they're regrowing cartilage now based off of.
So you can regrow your own cartilage and then have it implanted? I'm assuming they regrow it
In a lab,
yeah.
lab setting.
I think I saw like an ear
that's
looking
awesome.
thing on like a picture. Now, it could have been not associated with the study. You know how they
The ear might have been the mouse on the back of the mouse.
You're right. That's right. It was the back of the mouse.
Yeah,
So that was the back of the mouse.
Very interesting, but my leg's gonna grow off of a mouse's back.
That would be pretty epic, honestly. Just dragged it.
It's lugging around, to like
Low crawling.
help me.
Either that or you just have a really tiny little regrowth.
The Medevac podcast does not condone animal cruelty.
Yeah. Well, it's, like Deadpool when he's growing back his,
Yes,
his leg.
exactly.
He's got the baby legs at first.
Baby
Oh,
legs.
so creepy.
I would do it.
So
I would
creepy,
do
but
it.
so funny.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway,
Yeah,
we went off on a tangent
Digress. Where were we? I don't even remember.
Yeah. Growing legs back.
We were talking about off-label.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah. So I do like to make that distinction for people. It is not an FDA approved treatment. The way we are prescribing it is off label. Sometimes that's part of the education that I have to do, not just with clients, sometimes with other clinicians, with other like therapists, psychologists, family members that are concerned, right? That's a common, well, not as common as it used to be, but sometimes I have to help educate the family too, because they're like, I've heard that this is a party drug. I've heard that.
I was just going to say, what's the common resistance and the arguments that you're hearing against this?
It's a lot of the myths.
It's a bad stigma that's
Yeah.
out there about
Yeah.
all these medicines.
Right. And it goes back to like the 70s, right?
The war on drugs.
Yeah.
Acid flashbacks. Those are a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you guys
If you
know
crack your neck, you're going to have an LSD trip.
yeah.
Lucky.
Like, I'm like, what a different world that must have been, right? Like, I don't know if you guys watched the Netflix 4-parter or read the book, the How to Change Your Mind.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
and
good Michael Pollan.
Yeah, Michael Pollan was at Psychedelic Science,
Yeah,
so I got to listen to him talk, which was really exciting to hear him kind of talk, because I've loved him since he was doing food stuff.
Yeah.
Remember, I love food. So it was really exciting to actually see him in person and hear him talk. But you know, we pushed all of this underground. And although ketamine wasn't a part of that, it is still considered a psychedelic, an atypical one maybe, but it's still a psychedelic. You're still having experiences, shifts in perception. And I think that fear around it and around all of these other substances has really kind of made it harder to gain traction. I think honestly, the veteran community is part of the reason we're seeing so much traction in these areas, because we are seeing people get their lives back by taking these different substances. And it's crazy. It took that, right? It took 20 plus year war over 2 different countries and a lot of trauma physically and mentally to see this, right?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it takes extreme situations to make extreme changes.
We like extremes.
Yeah.
Just in general, humans, like we do.
Yeah.
It's like we like war. We don't do well in
but
peace.
we have to get extreme to get above the noise. Like
We do.
this big pharma really shut this down in the 70s and
It did.
80s.
Well, big pharma / the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Right. We don't do well with things we don't know. It's one of the hesitations I hear from people is I'm really scared what it's going to be like.
Sure.
With any of the substances, but that's definitely like, what is it going to be like?
Having a healthy respect and fear for it, it's important though.
It is
You shouldn't walk into it like, I can handle this.
I agree.
Well, and that's any person who utilizes these therapies or drugs for that matter should have a respect for it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what happens when you don't have a respect? You have a situation like your ex-husband.
Yes.
You know, who doesn't have a respect or fear for it.
Which what's interesting with my ex-husband is he actually would find ketamine occasionally. And knowing what I know now and knowing him at that point in his life, I think he was actually getting relief from it, right? He was having less cravings for amphetamines, for cocaine. He was having reduction in anxiety, in trauma. He didn't realize it, and he wasn't doing it in an intentional way with other things to support him, which is why it wasn't going to last.
Yeah.
And that's what the setting intentions are so important for.
Yeah,
And
if recovery is not on your radar,
it's not going to stick.
you're not gonna figure it out.
And two, there's a, I've done psilocybin recreationally, and I've done it in a therapy setting as well. There is a difference.
Big difference.
If you go into it with the mindset of this is therapy for me, you will have a totally different experience.
And even going into those therapy sessions and having the right mindset, not trying to squeeze it in after a busy day, a busy week, or, a family situation or a work situation came up, but I'm still going to do my session, right? That's actually a conversation I have not as commonly anymore, because we put a lot of emphasis on the set and setting as part of our education throughout the program with everyone.
Sure.
But every once in a while, someone will be like, I had a dud of a session, like number 5, nothing really happened. I was like, well, why do you think that was? Well, and then they go into it because they've thought about it. They've realized some of the mistakes they might have made and corrected them, or maybe they're not sure how to correct them. But doing it after work is a common one. How can we expect our brain to relax and help us heal, because that's what it's doing, it wants to heal, when we've just gone through this stressful day, maybe sat in traffic on the way home from work. Maybe we had to pick up our kids on the way home. Now they're screaming in the other room or fighting with each other. Oh, I still need to make dinner. I still need to do the lawn. Laundry's waiting for me, right? All of these life things. And so it's really about putting the intention around the experience, not just the hour itself, but the lead up to it, as well as the time after it.
Yeah, and that's a big subject that I like to talk about too, is environment.
Environment is key.
You have to, and this goes way beyond that. Before you even go into these therapies, you should reconsider your environment. What are you doing? What kind of good habits are you forming before you go to this, so that you don't spiral back?
It's
right.
True.
And you see that. So what do you do to help with someone's environment?
That's a tougher one, right? Sometimes people can't leave their environment. And in some of those cases, I'm like, hey, this might help, but it might only help temporarily. You're in this work environment, this family situation. You're a caregiver for a dying family member, right? That's not going to change, at least not right away.
Yeah, of course.
So maybe right now we're looking at this as helping you with the symptoms you're dealing with, building the resiliency to manage these symptoms day to day, and then we'll readdress once the situation changes.
Yeah.
And we're into kind of the next phase. And so for some people, it's more just kind of like a holding over, building the tools we need for being able to really address it down the road. Other times it's like, hey, have you thought about your day? I know you're trying to schedule this in between your work calls. Do you think maybe that's part of why you're highly anxious and can't sleep at night?
Huge. That's something that we did on our way back to from Mexico. They told us not to fly on Friday when we had this treatment on Tuesday. And we certainly did. We were like, we'll be fine.
We'll be fine. We're different.
And we felt so zen. We felt so good until we stepped into the airport.
The moment.
And it was like, when we walked in, it was just a waft across the face of this just negative energy, stress. And then you're just all of a sudden roped into it. So it had nothing to do with what we were feeling internally.
Nope.
It was the external environment that really affected us in a negative way.
Yeah.
And it can really affect the experience as well.
Yeah.
Right? If your household is chaotic, and that could be just messy, that could be lots of people, whatever it might be, and you're trying to do a ketamine session, how is your brain going to stop worrying about all of those things?
It's not.
If they're still there, right? And so it's a balancing act. There's benefits of being able to do it at home, right?
Yeah.
You're in your home, you can do it on your time. You're feeling more safe. You're not having to stick to that 9 to 5 doctor schedule, right?
Yeah.
Taking time off from work, or having a partner or friend take time off from work, paying for an Uber, and then you're feeling weird in an Uber afterwards, right? But that can also be a downside too, depending on what your home life looks like. right?
Sure.
So it is kind of, I think there's more benefits than not for most people, but sometimes that does come up as well.
Yeah.
And so we at Mindbloom require people to have, we call it a PTM, a peer treatment monitor. So every session, I don't care how many you've done, you could have done 1, you could have done 20. You have to have an adult there while you're doing your session. Not an adult on Zoom, not your neighbor in the next house over, or the apartment above you, physically in your house, your apartment, or at their place. You can do it at someone else's
Who does
place.
not participate.
Who does not participate.
And this is called a trip sitter.
So colloquially, we call that a trip sitter. We do give the monitor some extra education that maybe trip sitters don't get sometimes. But that is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And we have them check in periodically. Usually nothing's needed, or maybe it's a blanket. Ketamine makes people cold sometimes.
Yeah.
But generally you're just kind of like, well, they're good. Cool. Like my boyfriend plays video games, sets a timer. Or boyfriend, oh my gosh, my husband. Sorry, we've only been married for 3 months at this point. We're still newlyweds.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He sets a timer.
Okay.
Because otherwise he'll forget because he's playing video games. Yeah. He pauses. He comes to the door. He checks on me. He goes back to playing video games. And then after an hour, he comes and like rubs my arm. And it's like, hey, it's been an hour.
Yeah. So the sessions are only 60 minutes or so, right?
They are. Yeah.
Makes sense.
For most people, it's a bell curve.
Yeah.
So the average person is about an hour.
Okay.
You get some people who are rapid metabolizers and their sessions are like 30 minutes and they get frustrated because they're like, why am I not having an hour? I'm like, you're probably not.
Double
Genetics.
down, baby.
Genetics.
Double down.
Doesn't work that way, but good try. They ask that question. That's a fair question. They're like, if I take more or if I take another dose, is it going to change it?
No, it's the metabolism.
It's just, the metabolism the way it is.
It's just going to have a bigger curve.
That's
you might not remember anything.
I went back to the vet's facility in Mexico and I oversaw the first paralyzed veteran who went through the program.
Awesome.
And during this experience when I was on Ibogaine, it just sensory overload, right? Obviously, you're getting these auditory hallucinations. You feel like something is happening. You're not moving. But then to step on the other side of it and watch how these therapies work, I was like, this is the most boring thing in the world. I was like, these people are just laying here.
Ketamine's the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, you know what's going on in their heads.
Yeah.
You're like, I feel for you, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, most people with ketamine, you might have been cracking jokes when you had your ketamine, but like most people just kind of lay there and feel just really serene and like physically really relaxed is a really common one. Sometimes they might feel light and light and floaty. Other times they might feel like they're melting and heavy, right? So there is like a physical shift in perception for a lot of people to some degree.
Yeah.
But they just kind of hang out. There are some people that move. I do have some clients that are like, is it okay if I'm moving around? Like sometimes I really feel like I want to move, but everyone I've talked to, they don't. And I'm like, if that's what you need to do and you're safe,
go ahead.
I don't care. Don't be riding a bike. Don't be going up and down stairs. Nothing outside. I had someone be like, can I do this on a float in my pool?
Like,
no,
you're going to drown.
You will drown.
I don't care if your monitor's right there next to you.
It just doesn't sound like a good idea at all.
No. Safety first,
Bad
right?
choice.
Safety first. We don't want to be physically getting worse because of that. That's not going to help our mental health.
And it's not recreation either.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're not doing this for recreation. You're doing this for a purpose.
Yeah. And so like, if you want to do a little bit of movement, you want to do some light yoga, that's feeling good. You're in a safe place to do it. That's fine. It doesn't make you dizzy. It would make me dizzy. Ketamine makes a lot of people kind of have some, like 20% of people get some like mild motion sickness sensation. So for a lot of people, we do prescribe an anti-nausea medication for them to take, where they can take like an over-the-counter one. That generally isn't an issue if you're laying down for an hour, because when you get up, you're like, most of the medication has started to leave the system at that point. Some people do have like 30 minutes to 2 hours of just some like light nausea, kind of feeling like they're on a boat kind of sensation.
That's not too bad. I mean, if it's only an hour or two of like a minor hangover, that's not bad at all.
Like what most people experience afterwards, if they experience, I have some people that don't experience anything. Like for me, I pop right up and I'm like, let's eat. I'm starving, because I weirdly get so hungry after a ketamine.
And what's
session.
your favorite fruits after?
I do try to do fruits. Ketamine actually helps with insulin as well. Yeah, insulin resistance. So it's actually something we recommend is some like fresh cut fruit. One, it's easy to digest.
Yeah.
Two, it's just nutrient dense, which is good. And it's tastes good, right? So And our taste buds are a little funny for some people afterwards, since it's an oral anesthetic, right? We're putting the tablets in our mouth.
Okay.
So some people might not taste well, and fruits tend to have really bright flavors that you can kind of cut through that diminished taste a little bit.
Okay.
Not everyone has it, but it's definitely something I've heard from people. Like, is it normal to not taste things correctly? And I'm like, well, think about it. Your mouth was numb, right? Do you taste things normally after a dental procedure?
Not so well.
Typically, no. Same kind of idea. You couldn't taste your mouth for a while, guys. So, so there's the fruits and the vegetable, or fruits are a common one. I like doing like grilled vegetables and stuff afterwards. It's like kind of what
a whole ass steak.
I mean, my husband actually has made that for me after a session before. Because when I say I'm ravenous, I like want to eat everything every single time. I did an IM ketamine when I was in Denver recently, and I was with a friend, and we both looked at each other afterwards. And I'm like, "Do you want a cheeseburger or like a grilled cheese? Sounds amazing right now." So some people get this way.
Do you know the internal process? Is it speeding up your metabolism quite rapidly?
So it is an excitatory substance. So
sympathetic, and then you're just...
So glutamate's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It not only is working in the brain, it's actually increasing our heart rate, increasing our blood pressure.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like working out, and then right at the end of it, you're just ravenous.
Exactly.
Okay.
But not everyone. Other people are nauseated, and they're like, I don't want to be near food.
Can't touch it.
Right. So it's funny to see those dichotomies. Same thing, like most people are really like calm, sedated, just kind of want to veg out, maybe go to bed or take a nap. But I have other people who are more energized from it. They're like, is it okay for me to go for a walk after I do this? I'm like, as long as you're with someone, you're feeling okay, I have no issues with that. Yeah. So you do see that kind of dichotomy, right? We see brain fog. Right. It is an anesthetic at higher doses. So that kind of spaciness a little bit that can linger. That's the one that for some people will linger sometimes even into the next day a little bit, even with a good night's sleep. But no driving, no operating heavy machinery, no major life decisions. That's what we tell people. Those are the most common ones that we see. And like I said, most people don't really notice them too much. And then they kind of fade over the next 30 minutes to 2 hours. Most people are fully back to their baseline within 3 hours. So that's of putting the medicine in their mouth.
That's a relatively short experience.
It is.
That is. Yeah. And that's, would you maybe recommend a therapy like this first before diving into, say, psilocybin?
I think it's what works best for each person.
So a proper diagnosis of what regimen is going to work for you.
Yeah, and the challenge is, especially in the U.S., we really only have ketamine that's FDA approved right now. We have some areas in the U.S. that have decriminalized or legalized psilocybin, right? So we're kind of getting to a stage in MDMA, phase 3, right? Psilocybin. We're getting closer to these points where it'll be easier to make these diagnoses. And I think we'll find that there's probably like niches for each of them as well. And it might be dependent on the individual and the symptoms they're presenting with. Maybe one will work for a little while and another one will work after that for the rest of the symptoms. There's still so many unknowns in this field because of how long we've kind of had it underground, right? I think for the vast majority of people, I think ketamine is going to be more easily accessible because of Mindbloom. And we have a few similar companies at this point, not many, but Mindbloom's been in the space. So they started in 2018, started seeing people in person in 2019, went fully remote, surprise, surprise, 2020. And so they did close down their New York location. We don't do anything in person anymore. And I think we're in 35 states at this point is the last I heard. And we're not in more just because of the restrictions to telemedicine or to PAs and Ps to prescribe a Schedule 3 substance like ketamine. That's why we're not in more states. As laws change, we are always kind of staying on top of that to be hopefully able to open up in other states. And then the other problem we have is in some of these smaller population states, it can sometimes be hard to find clinicians licensed there that meet the requirements that can fill those roles. So if you're a clinician, please apply.
In Delaware or Connecticut? Or
actually, Delaware ended up being a tough one for us.
Was it?
Yeah. DC is another tough one for us. It's kind of interesting, but also large states with small populations can also be tough to fill sometimes. So it just kind of depends. But it's still in those states, right? It's not that we we aren't in those states, but there is still mostly like maybe in-person ketamine for them.
Okay.
We're also working on provider partnerships where if it requires them to be seen in person first, partnering with someone in that state to be able to go see them
makes sense.
and then be able to prescribe Mindbloom as like a treatment for them.
Okay.
But with it being FDA approved, it's in all 50 states.
Yeah.
And it's in our territories.
So can anyone, so if Mindbloom's not available to them via shipping, like you said, there's 15 specific states, can they still go to a local ketamine clinic? Or is that in all 50 states?
As far as I know, yes. The problem is like, think about Wyoming, right?
Rural Wyoming, right?
Right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of cities.
Yeah.
There's also just not a lot of mental health practitioners.
Yeah.
And so there's probably not a lot of people setting up this type of thing because people would have to travel hours to get this treatment. I have a couple of my Wyoming clients who they were traveling to Montana. They would drive 6 hours one way to get an IV ketamine session before they found out we were in Wyoming.
Then they have to wait a day and a half to drive back.
Well, someone has to drive them, right? So then that's taking their partner, spouse, friend out of...
That's 2 whole days.
Yeah.
Once a week for 5-6 weeks.
Well, so IV and IM ketamine typically does like a loading style. So they actually will do 6 sessions in 2 to 3 weeks typically.
Oh man, so you have to stay there or go back and forth every other day.
And you're missing...
I think I would rather do that. Just get it all done.
Get it all done. Yeah. just keep me plugged in for a week.
I'm just gonna hang out. It's fine. But then you're thinking like lodging costs, right?
Yeah.
You're thinking fuel.
Yeah.
If your spouse works, then
time off work,
or you got to find sitters if they're staying at home spouse. Like all of these extra costs,
huge
and it's
inconvenience.
also way more expensive. That's the challenge. You're paying not just for the procedure, you're paying for the place.
Yeah, the clinic. Yeah.
And all of the costs that go along with it.
Yeah.
So I've heard anywhere from $400 per session to $1,500 per session.
Wow. That's insanely expensive.
Yes.
And
Mindbloom, a
And
little
you just
over
said
$1,200 for 6
on the last episode that this is extremely cheap.
It is extremely cheap.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's another thing is the justification on this is saving people's lives. Why the heck?
The facility costs. It's think about all of the rent.
Yeah.
Right? Why aren't you guys in a facility doing
And
this?
they're staying there inpatient for 3 weeks, right?
No, so it's all outpatient typically. Yeah, but still, you're lost time from work, right? Because they're not doing after hours, they're not doing weekends typically. So it's a 9 to 5 clinic. You're having someone else need to bring you, or you're paying costs to pay for a cab or an Uber Lyft home, right? You might have to have a sitter for your kids. Like there's lots of other additional costs that play into this because of the rigid scheduling and this in-person requirement. And if you are someplace rural, then you're factoring in gas, you're factoring extra time off from work, all of these other things. So one of the things that like Dylan, our CEO, wanted to do was make ketamine more accessible to people.
Sure.
Because he like truly believes in what this does. And he has, right? Like you can do it after work if you want, or after the kids go to bed. That's a common one is like, they still might do it on a weekend, but like little kids in the house, not a lot of sitter opportunities. We'll just do it after 8.
I think that's a really important note to tell our audience base there is that this is so safe that you could do it with your children upstairs sleeping.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that's huge. That is a huge, huge salient characteristic of this.
Yeah. I think that's a big relief for a lot of people because when they hear us talk about, psychedelics, like traditional psychedelics, like psilocybin, they're like, dude, I have kids. Like I can't get away from the kids and I can't do that around them.
Yeah.
Like I understand. It makes sense. Like,
and those experiences are hours typically.
8-10 hours. Yeah.
And this is an hour.
So the commitment to this is, that's the reason why I asked that question too, is like, this may be a good stepping stone, but I get it. There's different diagnoses to it, but
it's still being figured out, I think.
Yeah.
I think for some people, this will be the medication that works for them and they might not need anything else.
Which would be great. Yeah.
Right. For me, like I don't have trauma symptoms anymore. I haven't had a trauma flare since 2021.
Have you noticed any other like physical changes, as far as, sometimes you get that out of like the Ibogaine experience, you're just a little bit, I feel like I could stretch better after it, Yeah.
The first time, I did my 5-MeO experience, the day after, I felt physically taller. Like my body was loose. I could touch my toes without trying.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you think that's the improvement in your anxiety stress levels?
I think absolutely.
Yeah.
It's got to be stress. You know, it's got to be a reduction in stress.
because when we're stressed, we
you're
tend to
tense. Yeah.
tense up. It's a really common symptom of
It
mental
just
health.
makes you
is
a little
that
bit more loosey-goosey.
tension
Yeah.
or grinding or
Yeah.
headaches,
Oh, yeah.
right?
We're just constantly flexed.
Which-
do you see that with ketamine too? Is that just melting of
For a lot of people,
cortisol?
yeah.
Just-
As our stress response goes down,
Yeah.
the people are getting into more activity. So their generally physical health improves with a lot of people when I'm seeing them for their follow-ups. Maybe not the very first one, but down the road, like I'm like, hey, let's talk about physical health, new medications, right? It's been some months. How are we doing? How's that diabetes doing, right? And they're like, oh, I came off my blood pressure medication. I've been working out. I've lost 20
Yeah.
pounds, right? They're feeling better, motivated to be able to take care of themselves. And it's also easier to do these things that are good for them.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we see physical improvements as well.
And most physical improvements can be from that mental state changing.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
I mean, chronic pain, right?
Yeah.
Chronic pain is so challenging and it's so closely related to our mental health. As someone who deals with chronic pain every day, I'm sure there's some level of chronic pain that you both experience, right? When that pain flares, my anxiety goes up. Right?
Yeah.
At least now I know the connection to it so I can actually work through my CBT skills and like conceptualize it and manage it way better. But before, as the pain goes up, the anxiety goes up. As the anxiety goes up, the pain goes up, right? It's this like
Vicious
cycle.
cycle.
Which came first? Chicken and egg, right? And our brain gets tricked into like this chronic process, this feedback loop that we have to break out of. And ketamine
It's interesting
helps
that it when you look at habits, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a habit forming. Chronic pain could be habit forming.
Yep.
And that something can trigger that response.
It's
Your stress goes up. Now your back starts to hurt.
Yep.
Like this like vicious cycle.
It is. It's such a vicious cycle. And I have that conversation regularly with people, especially I work with a lot of vets, both my California license and my Wyoming license. It's one of the things that I love doing at Mindbloom. So the more the merrier. First responders, firefighters, and almost all of us have some level of chronic pain, right? If you've been in the field for a bit, it's just our job.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
physically, we ask
gonna be
so much of our bodies while we
Yeah.
are doing the work that we do.
Yeah.
I always joke like I might almost be 40, but I feel like I'm almost 50, right? Because my body's just been beat up.
35 going on 40.
Yeah.
My back's 50, but I'm 30.
Yeah,
you
my
know?
mentally I'm probably about 20.
Yeah.
But and it's all of the things that we've asked our body to do, right? And so it makes sense that it's telling us, hey, maybe you can't run that way anymore. Like, yeah you might want to run faster, but maybe you shouldn't. But it's hard. I think we're stubborn as veterans, right? We're like, but my body's supposed to do this. So
Yeah.
it's going to do this.
I run into the fact of I used to be able to do this.
Yeah, I can see
should,
that.
I should do that.
And how does that work?
I do it every single time.
7-minute mile, not good enough.
No,
Gotta go faster.
And that's actually funny that you mentioned that. That's like one of my, the goals in Rangers is to run less than an 8-minute
Yeah.
mile. So for me, that's the standard. If you do anything exceeds that, then you suck. And so I still live by that mentality.
I see.
Yeah.
It's very ingrained.
It is very ingrained, but
They did a good job.
I got 6:57 on my mile, so I can't complain.
Between the broken finger, the bruised ribs, I tried to jog on the treadmill this morning and my finger went wah, wah,
Yeah.
wah.
Oh, it
And I was
starts
like,
to throb. Yeah.
you know what? We're just going to go at a nice gingerly 11 minutes
Yeah.
today. It's
Oh, yeah.
fine.
See,
And
I'm
short too.
Yeah. Well, that's okay.
I've got a little T-Rex corgi legs that just kind of go
You
like
and me
this.
both, don't worry.
Corgi legs.
Yeah. That's what we joke about in my house. I have little corgi legs and little T-Rex arms. And with my last name being Tersavich, Tersarex.
Tersarex.
Yeah, my husband came up with that one.
I like that one.
Yeah, I was
good.
actually quite impressed.
Get your
A
own
decade
sticker made.
plus in the Army
Never
did
heard
not
that
come
one.
up
Yeah.
with that.
It's great.
Right?
Tersarex.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to that pain, mental health connection, for me, that was a game changer. My pain level, I'm always going to have pain, right?
Yeah.
That's just a part of my life now, but it's how I'm responding to that pain.
Sure.
I'm not spiraling the same way. And I see that with a lot of people with ketamine too. we're not treating their pain, we're treating their mental health. But as the mental health improves, that stress response goes down, the pain tends to follow suit. And maybe they're not needing as many meds. Maybe they're able to get into yoga like they wanted to and get that flexibility back, which helps.
And that is a huge thing too, as we talk about environment. And sometimes you mentioned that you can't change your environment entirely,
right?
But there is things that you can incorporate into your environment that will help with that mindfulness and that readiness.
It is, yeah.
Yoga is a great example. Yeah. Those chronic pains and issues that you have, 80% of the time it could be alleviated by stretching every day.
Yeah. Yep.
And I ran into the same thing. I had chronic back injuries. I broke my back in service, and struggled with that for many years. And over the after my experience in Mexico, my self-care started to change. And one of which I integrated was stretching. I don't do it every day, but I try my best. And now I don't have back pain like I used to.
Yeah.
So that helps with that mental health.
Such a little change.
And now we're changing our mental wiring as well.
Yep.
When we're just physically feeling better.
Yeah.
In doing that stretching, whether it's true yoga or not, I don't think is as important. I think yoga does have that mindfulness component to it, which is really important. But I know yoga is kind of a taboo term in some veteran circles.
Stretching. Yeah. We'll just call it stretching.
While breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it really does change so much, right? So my husband and I have had a series of unfortunate events this year. He had a car accident right as we were buying our house earlier in the year, broke his tibia due to the force of the accident. So he was out for a while. I then bruised my rib cage walking. I'm very graceful.
Nice.
Coming out of that, then I was traveling for different conferences. And while I was at the conference in Denver, he filleted his hand open.
Oh, no.
With a very, very sharp knife and needed upwards of 25 stitches. The plastic surgeon said...
What was he cutting open?
Is he whittling?
He wasn't...
He just kept going once he hit his hand.
So you two will appreciate this. We have a variety of weaponry at the house, including he has a really nice rifle. And he likes to do contact drills still. He was infantry in the Marines.
Sure.
And he's gotten some accoutrements for his vest recently. And he was moving them around, trying to get them set up so he could go to the range.
Oh, no.
And he had been taking the knife, this brand new dagger, out of its sheath to move the sheath. But this one time, he did not.
Oh, no.
And then the knife that had never cut anything just went through his palm.
Oh,
nice.
Yes. So.
Well, at least it's got a taste for blood now.
We know it works.
Yeah.
So he starts recovering from that. And before he can even start to fully cut and do things, I slam my hand in a metal door and a metal door frame and crush my fingertip. So we actually started to wake up earlier, half an hour earlier every day in the intent of stretching.
Okay.
Except neither of us have been in a place where we've been able to stretch very much recently. So we just spend time together instead.
That's an interesting topic, though, is I just read this book called Atomic Habits. And
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet.
It's small changes that you make that make the biggest differences. Sometimes when we set these goals of I'm going to wake up. So now I'm losing a half hour of sleep, something that I love to do. So how is that the extrinsic motivation that I need to stretch? So interesting philosophy in there was the 2-minute rule. Is just do it for 2 minutes and see what happens. So, when you get up, start stretching for 2 minutes. Don't take away. That's probably why you're not successful at that.
That and the continued injuries. So we are still being active. It's just the level of what we wanted to do is not quite there yet, right? So we're working into that. And now that I am a month out, I'm able to jog slowly now, so I'm not getting the same pain. But if I had done this and the rib cage 2 years ago, I would not be okay right now. I would be angry. I would be snapping at him, snapping at my coworkers, not doing my job because now I'm distracted by the pain. I'm not sleeping as well, right? This I just kind of laughed about.
Yeah. Now you have a better response.
I'm people are like, what'd you do? And I'm like, well, I was an idiot. And I couldn't shut a door correctly. That's what happened, right? And that's what I think ketamine and psychedelics do, right? They give us this ability to process and be more resilient. And yes, am I stretching the way I want right now? No, but you might not stress. I stretch, right? So I also have a meditation practice. One of the reasons I like yoga just traditionally is there's so many styles and it's so modifiable. So no matter what you're dealing with, we can modify it.
There's something to do for you.
Yeah, like I had a wrist surgery a couple years ago. I was still able to do yoga. I just wasn't putting pressure on that wrist for 6 months, whatever it was. So that integration of the experience that you guys have found to be so key, and listening to the recommendations of the people helping you integrate are so important, right? Like, it's not just going and doing the experience or staying in your home, like with ketamine, and doing the experience. It's what you do afterwards. And I tell people, dedicate 5 minutes. So I didn't know the 2-minute rule, but I say at least 5 minutes of your life every day while you're doing ketamine to something that makes you happy, will help you in the long run. Journaling, working out, talking to someone you love, therapy, painting, drawing, trying a new hobby that you've always wanted to do. It doesn't matter.
Creative outlets.
Engage that brain in a positive way to start rewiring it in a positive way so we can get rid of those ingrained negative patterns and behaviors that we have. And 6 sessions might not be enough, right? Like, it's okay to not be okay after 6. We've usually been dealing with decades of mental health stuff. And if you've been in the military, if you've been in like working with police, first responder, in these like high charging fields, it might not be decades, but it's a lot of crap poured into a very short period of time where you're on all of the time, like we talked about. So it's okay to not be okay yet. It's okay to need more support. It's okay to need more ketamine sessions. It's okay to consider other psychedelic options, right? That's okay. And that's a regular conversation I have with myself, but it's also a regular conversation I have with my clients. Like, some people are like, well, I did 6 sessions. Why am I still lightly depressed? And I'm like, are you as depressed as when you started though?
Yeah. It's not a magic fix-it pill. It is this will help you make changes more easily pill.
Exactly.
Right?
This is a tool.
This is going to help with your long-term integration. The thing that I think a lot of people have a misconception with psychedelics is that that's going to fix me. Like, that's not the case.
This is the magic pill.
It's not. And that's not the case. It's not something that's going to fix you. It's going to allow you to begin to fix yourself.
And that's managing expectations as well. If you have those expectations going in, like you said, you're going to be disappointed every time.
Yep. And that is something that we try really hard to get across to people in the messaging, as well as when they're talking to clinicians, when they're talking to their guides, is this isn't all of a sudden going to be, you're going to wake up and feel normal, right? Whatever normal is. It's that this is a tool that we're going to use to build more tools, to build that resiliency, so that when you are approached with a new topic, thing that's stressing you out, because we're humans, we're going to be stressed, we're going to get sad, like that doesn't go away. You're knowing how to handle it better.
And at the very least, this could buy you 1 single second. And 1 single second to really assess what's happening in your life could make the biggest difference in the world. It's the difference between killing somebody and not killing somebody. You know, that's
killing yourself.
That's
or not killing yourself.
That split second. And you've said this, that you've done these therapies, and to take that moment and say, I'm not going to get mad at this. I'm an idiot for this door, right?
This is silly.
Or I'm going to take this as constructive criticism so that I can improve myself, not get mad and snap at them.
There's this book I'm reading right now called The Art of Taking It Easy. And the author is a comedian as well. And he uses this analogy, are you being attacked by a bear? And so for a long time, we were being attacked by bears on a regular basis, right? But now we're not. How do we turn that off? Why do we still respond this way? And so I really like his analogy in using that versus like you're sitting in traffic. Why are you responding like you're being attacked by a bear?
It's an incorrect response.
It is.
Yeah, and I always say, it's like no one's shooting at you. Like with our team, you know, if there's something going on, it's like, okay, guys, let's take a break. No one's shooting at you. And that just little analogy could make all the difference in the world.
You pause. You're like,
oh, it's not a big deal.
Bears eat beets. Sorry, I had to say it.
But it's true. Like
traffic.
When you're sitting, like that person cut me off. Okay, but I didn't get into an accident. I still going to get to my final destination, maybe a second later.
Yeah, we're all going nowhere. It's okay.
Yeah. All right, like let them be angry. I had a client recently who told me he'd lost a friend since I'd last seen him during a road rage incident. His friend got shot in the head.
Oh, Jesus.
And it's like, it goes back to what triggered that escalation. Someone didn't pause and think, right?
Yeah.
Somebody had an incorrect response to the event,
the actual thing that was happening.
Yeah,
And
there's some brutal road rage is like the biggest thing that I dealt with. Like, I thought I had recovered from a lot of.
And then you moved to San Antonio.
And then the worst drivers in the world is in San Antonio. In the world, I've been in better places in Afghanistan that drive better than these people here.
I don't disagree either.
It's like they do it on purpose, though. They're like, 8 lanes.
Yesterday,
we were driving here this morning. Yeah, like, it's terrible traffic.
I know, but being able to take that. Take your perspective and shift that could totally change the way you drive. And that's something that I try to do every time I get angry. I'm like, okay, this person that is driving this way is probably having the worst day of their life.
Yep.
And I have to just let them get to A to B.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Putting yourself at least a little bit in that other person's shoes.
Yeah, benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And it could be, you know, I mean, it could be something bad happening in their life and they're lashing out and they don't have that perspective. So having that heightened responses, it changes your day. It does. How many times have you been like wrecked from just someone cutting you off and you're just like hours? You're just like,
Yeah, it's true. And it's not fun because then it ruins the whole rest of your day and it ruins the day of everyone around you.
And why? Is it that important? Did you lose 20 seconds on your trip? Did you lose a minute?
Maybe not even that much.
Maybe not even that.
Yeah. I actually had a surprisingly California client who did have a lot of issues with his anxiety around driving and around the traffic of getting to work and was having panic attacks. He actually couldn't drive on the highway anymore. It had gotten so bad. I actually saw him last week and he's going to be finishing his last set of treatments after a year we've been working together.
Nice.
He is like, I can't even imagine the person I was when I started working with you a year ago. Like, work is still work. That's another big stressor for him. But like, he's able to get out. He's not having panic attacks thinking about driving onto a highway. Like, that's huge. Yeah. Like, how much of our society is based on driving on highway? Would we have been able to get here without highways from where you picked me up?
Yeah, not at all.
It would have taken a lot longer.
Horseback.
Yeah, right.
And so, like, how isolating was that for him and worsening of his symptoms, right? And so over the course of a year, and I want to say he's going to be at 24 total sessions of ketamine. I want to say he's just starting his 19th. He's going to be spacing them like once a month apart. So we do work on spacing further out if you're using it for a longer term, if you're able to.
Sure.
He's like, I don't think I'm going to come back after this one. I think I'm in a good spot. And I'm like, that's great. I mean, if you need me, I'm here, but I think you're right. Yeah. I think you're doing all the stuff that you need to do for yourself. And he did. He instituted mindfulness. He worked with a therapist who also helped him with like CBT skills. He adjusted his working life a little bit so he wasn't in the peak of California traffic, right?
Yeah.
Leaving a little earlier, leaving a little later, which makes a huge difference too. Yeah. Like he made the changes to make this work for him. So
that sounds like somebody who's like really managing their care, really taking their care seriously.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately what we don't see often enough is people taking control of their own care like that.
Yeah.
Being willing to make adjustments in their life and see that it is going to be a 1, 2, 3 year process to really ultimately recover from that stuff.
Those are also the same types of people that, have those problems, like you said, of this doesn't work for me, or this is not the magic pill.
Yeah, I tried it once. It didn't work for me. Like,
you tried it once. You just
I didn't like the therapist. Which fair. I get that.
That is fair. That is like therapy is like dating.
It is. You have
finding
to find the right
therapist is like dating.
Yeah.
I agree.
And before, I've done therapy since I was a kid, and I've fired numerous therapists before.
Well, I mean, I was seeing a therapist in Afghanistan the whole time they said I had a panic disorder, telling the therapist about what happened to me. Never crossed their mind that I had PTSD. Not a once, right?
Yeah.
Craziness.
So definitely tell people, I'm like, just because you had one bad experience doesn't mean they're all like this.
Yeah.
But
You can find a better one.
You can find a better one. It can take time though. And right now, therapists are hard to get.
Yeah, everyone's.
It's been a tough few years, and they're burnt out too. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Therapists are burnt out because of the last few years as well.
Yeah.
So they need therapy too.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's a never-ending cycle.
It is a never-ending
in that
cycle.
direction.
Yeah. I work with a couple therapists directly, like referring people to like back and forth. Now I've worked with them for the last 3 years at this point. So it's been really great to kind of build those relationships, and they feel comfortable now referring people regularly to ketamine. They're like, I think this person's a good fit. Obviously let me know if they're not. And every single time they're a good fit. Like, honestly, I'm like, you so smart. You got this. So good. But it's exciting to be able to have that pairing as well. Like the guides we work with are phenomenal too. So we work in a team. And so sometimes we can get a guide, a therapist, and me all on the same page to support this client and make sure they're getting the best care that they can. And these are the ones that are coming like ready to make changes, right?
Yeah.
Because there are people that still come to this that are rigidly like, this is going to work. It's got to work. I don't have time to do these other things, or I don't want to do this, or I've tried this in the past. And it can still work, but maybe it's not going to last as long.
Open-mindedness plays a huge part in all of these therapies.
It does. And so, sometimes it's a conversation like, is right now the right time for this? Like, I'll support you if this is what you want to do, but is this the right time?
Yeah.
There could be benefits to waiting, especially like we talked about earlier, when your environment is poor. Like if you're in a bad home environment right now, you should not do this and then return home. Wait a little bit until your home environment changes or you find somewhere else to do it.
Yeah.
There's always benefits.
So it doesn't happen as frequently, but having that monitor, the trip sitter, right? During the pandemic, particularly, that was a challenging one for some people who were very, very isolated.
Sure.
Either they'd moved or, they weren't close with their family already. They didn't feel comfortable talking to their family. So we still see it sometimes, but that's a big part of it. Like I've had people choose to not do a session with a monitor there, right? And then they had a horrific session and they're talking to me about their horrific session. And I was like, well, where was your monitor in this? Well, I didn't have them.
Yeah.
Well, why not?
Like
They're actually a big part of your experience, right? They're
Yeah.
there and they're there, that whatever comes up, they're going to support you, right? So it's not just having the person there, but having the right person there, because that plays a huge role too. If you're fighting with your partner a lot and maybe you're not in the best place together, is that really the best person for you?
Yeah.
Even if they say they're going to do it, are they like, do you have that in your brain that they're supporting you, or are they just doing this because they have to? And that's what's in the back of your brain, right? It doesn't matter what's actually happening. It's what's in your brain.
Yeah. And it's the truth too. I did the stellate ganglion block in 2019, but I had a bad home environment at the time.
Yep.
I was living with somebody. We were in the middle of a breakup. It was really bad.
Yeah.
So I came back and I had 2 weeks of like, I felt way better and I felt up, like no more symptoms. And because I was back in that shitty home environment, it just drug me right back down.
Yep.
And I wasted a flight across the US, 2 days of, it's a light surgery.
It is, yeah.
That I went through. And I should have set up my home environment to be better. Like I knew the result, like I should have separated myself from that and come home to an empty home instead.
Right.
And that would have helped prolong and benefit me in the long run. And I knew that to be true, but I still didn't do anything. So
it's a learning experience.
it is. But at the end of the day, you're taking these steps to better yourself.
Yep.
And if you're not going to take all of the steps to better yourself, then you need to stop and consider or find somebody to assist you through that.
Or at least be better in part,
Yeah.
Just try.
In part. Just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Gradual changes.
And
Absolutely.
that was probably part of your gradual change, right? So for some people coming and seeing me, maybe it's not the best time for them.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't change or they're not ready to change things, but maybe ketamine gives them that glimpse of something that helps them to start making the change. And I've actually had that a handful of times where I saw someone maybe 2020, 2021, didn't see him again. It's like, all right, well, maybe they didn't see improvement or maybe they're doing great. I don't really know.
Yeah.
And then I'll see him again recently. I had someone who they ended up quitting their job that they'd had for 15 years to leave. They're a clinician and they're going to go open up their own practice. They realized that working in a hospital system was creating a lot of their stuff. And at the time they started ketamine, they couldn't fully see that. It took a little bit, like they kind of got a glimpse of it.
Pierce the veil a little bit. Yeah.
And then over the course of the year, it had planted that seed enough for them that they're like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? And so when I saw them, they had put in their date. They had like 2 months left, and they were using ketamine. Obviously, some transitional anxiety coming up, still some a little like lingering depression from the burnout, and they were going to use the ketamine to kind of work through that and also kind of figure out where they want to go with their practice. Do they really want to have their own practice, or do they want to go into something totally different? You know, they have this new opportunity. So, you know, for them, the environment wasn't ideal, and they didn't change it, but it was enough to kind of put it there. And maybe for you after the block, you didn't go back into the right kind of situation, but you were able to recognize that and maybe really force those changes a little faster than maybe they would have happened otherwise.
Absolutely.
I try to, one of the things that ketamine and Mindbloom has really helped me to do is try and see the why behind things, right? Like not be angry that my marriage ended, or not be angry that I have this weird, rare medical condition, right? It's to be like, okay, these things happen. I had this shitty marriage to end up in the military. The military put me through PA school. Now I'm a PA and I'm helping people in a way that I never would have thought of, right? And I met my now husband and have like a relationship. We've had a fight and it was 100% my fault. I will fully admit it. My fault. But communication in a way that I have never experienced in any relationship that I've had. And I didn't know that was possible, right? And so all of these things have happened. So I try to help people with their ketamine and with their lives in general be like, all right, let's think, why is this happening? It's shitty. It sucks. We don't want to go through it. But what can we pull from this that's positive? Because there's positive, like we joked about, I think it was the last episode, the pandemic. Not a lot of great came out of it.
Yeah.
But there was some silver linings, right? I found Mindbloom. Remote medicine is more accessible than it's ever been before, and I can't see it going back too far, right? Ketamine, this came out of the pandemic, because would we have ever gotten this far this fast? Maybe, it's possible, but 35 states treating over 25,000 people in 3 years. Awesome. I don't know if that's possible if we hadn't had this space to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think in a way the pandemic was definitely a wake-up call, and it shook things up. Some people adapted, some people didn't.
Yep. I agree. And now we're finding this new normal, right?
Yeah.
It's for a lot of people, like, I will never work full-time in a clinic ever again. That's not a life I want. I'm gonna be honest. Only reason I'm wearing pants is because I'm going on a plane later today. That is the only reason I get cold on a plane. I don't start work until 10 or 11, right? Because I see California and Wyoming. So I have my mornings to go work out, to meditate, to see friends, whatever it might be, right? So I've adjusted my life and realized what the priorities in my life are because of the pandemic. Would that have happened if I had just gone out of the military and gone into a job? Maybe, but I think it would have taken a lot longer.
And I think that's a really good point that you make, but you've also proven yourself through the military and PA school and all of this stuff where you have other people that have, and this is a totally different conversation, but I do want to say it, is the sense of entitlement that came out of this is substantial, and people have a tendency to, as a barista, say, I want to work remote. And I'm sorry, but that doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I think it goes back to like the personality types that are drawn to the military, right?
You have to have discipline.
Discipline and a certain sense of selflessness, right? Like, I'm not joining the military. Well, I mean, I did join the military for my own personal reasons, like paying back school and stuff. But like the reality is I'm selling my life away to go support a bigger cause, which we don't. I really like countries that institute some sort of service. It doesn't have to be military, but like volunteerism or something for a year or two. I think that's really important. We're so far away from that, and getting out of your own little bubble too, not just in volunteering in your small town, but going across the U.S., meeting new people. Because we're so isolated.
Give yourself some exposure.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
And that's something the military does.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they do a very good job at it.
My husband will also tell you, I do not like praise or anything either. Like, I'm just kind of like, no, it's just what happened. I go, okay, it's fine. So I think that's that part of a lot of us too, is a lot of us are more humble, either because of our service or we were already like that when we went into the service. Right. Like I'm doing this because I want to get the word out to vets and to other people like me who might not realize what's available to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not like, yes, I'm healing as well as I go through this. Yes, I'm helping my company as well as I go through this. But the reality is I want to help every person that I can. Mm-hmm. That is my goal in life.
So what would you say to the audience for those that are considering ketamine therapy?
Okay. Yes. Just in general, that's what would I say?
That's it. Is someone,
okay.
is the audience here are probably going to be considering this?
Yeah. So I would say, one, do your research, right? It might not be for you. It might not be for you right now, but at least do the research. Mindbloom has done a really good job of compiling a lot of literature that you can look there. We've written a lot of articles. You'll see my smiling face on a lot of them because I medically review them as well, most of them. Ask questions. If you're not sure, we have a support team that can answer them. And if they don't know the answer, they reach out to clinicians like me to answer them. Don't think that your medical issues are going to stop you. There are certain things that might prevent you from doing remote treatment, but most things we can work with. The big ones would be certain cardiac issues, just because it does stimulate the heart. So like I've had a few people with aneurysms that we couldn't really do remotely.
Sure.
But a lot of times, like I've treated people with MS, with Parkinson's, right? People who have had prior heart attacks, we've just gotten medical clearance for them.
Okay.
So don't be so worried about the medical stuff. We can a lot of times figure that out. And if you don't look like a candidate for remote treatment, we can help you try and find an in-person treatment near you. And it's okay to be scared.
Yeah.
It's okay. It is okay. I have done this before and I still get nervous before I go into a session.
Sure.
I think that is healthy and natural. So it is okay. Just ask the questions.
A healthy respect.
Yep.
And where can we find you?
So mindbloom.com, mindbloom.com. There is also a Facebook community for Mindbloom for prospective clients and current clients. They're amazing, honestly. Lots of great sub threads about set and setting, different kinds of experiences there.
Okay.
They're also on Instagram. I cannot remember their handle right now, but if you search for Mindbloom, they're one of the quick ones to pop up. And we also monitor Reddit. So if you tag us, then sometimes me might respond to you, but we also kind of keep an eye on Reddit because there is a Mindbloom subreddit on Reddit. So we're all over the place.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and sharing your story,
thanks,
sharing
guys.
what you do, and the work you do with our nation's heroes is quite outstanding.
Thank you.
We can't wait to join our session.
Yeah, give it a shot.
Yeah.
Here in a couple
Sadly,
weeks.
I won't be able to be your clinician since I'm not in Texas, but
That's all right.
lots of awesome clinicians and also other veterans on staff there, not just me. So
Perfect.
Amazing.
Can't wait to give it a shot. But thank you very much for coming on today.
thanks, guys.
Thank you to Mindbloom as well. This has been the Medevac podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening today. Remember, hit that share button, interact with the video somehow, and head on over to mindbloom.com. Give them a look. Thanks.
See you next time.
Bye.